Today I'm going to tell you an amazing story that will change your idea of the 17th, 18th, and early 19th century. There are many documents of the 17th-18th centuries telling about the church schism, about the life of Peter the Great, and much more. Most of the history of ancient Russia is based on these documents. So all these documents have several very important features, and these features will help us understand, even without picking up the documents, in which century this document was made. I'm not going to pull the cat by the tail, but let's get down to business right away. And we will start with Arkady Mamontov's wonderful film, The Old Believers. But what interests us now is not what Mamontov was talking about, but what he showed. And he shows truly amazing books from the collection of the State Historical Museum. The Service Book of 1655th year, and another unique manuscript of the same period. The manuscript is generally a credit. After all, it contains a resolution signed by the Russian hierarchs of the 17th century. Starting with Patriarch Nikon himself, then Macarius of Novgorod, and there is another unique autograph of the first martyr for the faith, Bishop Paul of Kolumna. Why am I showing you these pages? After all, I'm acting illogically. After all, the very existence of such a book confirms the historical version about Patriarch Nikon, and that there was a real church schism in the 17th century. So that's it. Just take a close look at the photos of the pages of this book. Does nothing bother you? Yes, I forgot to clarify. You need to look not at the text, but at the paper on which this text is drawn. The text itself, of course, can also be sorted out on the shelves, but today we are looking at the most obvious sign. The color of the paper. Everything seems to be fine with the color. Plain white paper. Of course not perfectly white, but still. And now let's remember in what century they learned to bleach paper. This will help us with a wonderful article in LiveJournal, which was written by Dmitry Milnikov. Milnikov refers to another blogger in Dukin08. Many people are familiar with this name. I myself have previously read his articles. I will not read the whole article to you, so as not to waste your time. The link will be under the video. I will focus only on the most interesting moment. In what century did they learn to produce white paper? The process of producing bleaching powder from chlorine and slaked lime was invented in 1799 year by Charles Tennentham, a British chemist entrepreneur. That is, until 1799 year, white paper simply could not exist in real life. But Arkady Mamontov shows us in his film, the leaves of the book 1655th year, which are almost white. How can this be? Here we have two options. Option 1 is a new model book made at the end of the 19th century. Option 2. The book was actually drawn in the 17th century, and the color of the pages is white because it is based not on wood pulp, but on another material. For example, pure cotton. And this version has a solid technological basis. Here's a look at what I found in a rather informative article, brief information about the technology of paper production. I count only the most important thing, the article itself under the video. Wood pulp can be white and brown. To obtain a brown mass, the wood is steamed in boilers before and after erasing. Brown wood has a stronger fiber and is used to produce brown cardboard and durable wrapping paper. Everyone probably represents the color of such cardboard. It doesn't exactly resemble the color of a page from a 17th century book. So, to get white paper from cellulose, it is bleached with a solution of bleach or chlorine. This technology, as I have already said, appeared only in 1799 year. But another point is also important for our history. Wood pulp paper appeared only in the 19th century. Charles Fenerty of Halifax made the first paper out of wood pulp in 1838 year. He did not patent his invention, and others did it for him. Patented a paper based on wood fiber. 1838th year is very important for understanding our past, because now we know how to distinguish the original old document from the new model. It is enough to give a chemical analysis of the paper. If there is wood pulp in it, it means that this document cannot be dated earlier than 1838th year. That is, in this way, it is possible to check for the originality of Pushkin's letter, records and letters about the War of 1812, and here you can even do without chemical analysis. It is enough to look at the document of interest in a conventional microscope, and by the shape of the fiber, you can see how the paper was made from ground rags or cellulose. And here's what's interesting. I haven't seen examples of such studies in the modern press. Historians date documents in any way, but for some reason, they are mostly silent about the composition of the paper itself. Such studies were conducted only by historians of the 19th century. I don't know why they did it. Maybe they were more responsible. So, until 1838th year, paper was produced, roughly speaking, from cotton, linen and hemp rags. Therefore, in many European cities there was an organized collection of rags. All the old fabrics went into the digesters. For example, old sails, rags, torn clothes were first ground in special paper mills, then boiled in boilers, and then paper sheets were produced by hand scooping. This technology was mechanized in Russia only in 1816th year, when the paper-making machine of the company Fudry started working in Peterhof. And only in 1880th year, the first pulp paper production plants appeared in Russia. That is, until the beginning of the 19th century, all paper was made from rags. And since the bleaching method had not yet been invented, imagine what color it had. Anything but white. And this is confirmed even by a modern article. Here's what it says: rag half-mass. Rags are sorted, crushed into pieces, boiled under pressure in digesters with chemicals, washed and ground in a so-called semi-mass roll apparatus. Rag paste is produced unbleached for low grades of paper and cardboard, and bleached by treating with a solution of bleach or chlorine to produce high grades of paper. That is, even in our time, when rags are cooked in boilers with chemicals, the source material does not come out white. To obtain a white color, additional processing of chlorides is needed. Well, Arkady Mamontov in his film, for some reason, shows us almost white sheets of a book of the 17th century. How can this be? Because the bleaching technology has not yet been invented. Of course, you can fantasize and assume that the sheets of paper could be bleached by hanging them in the sun. But, according to the assurances of technologists, the casting paper dried in the sun becomes very fragile and unusable. At first glance, there are no more ways to get pure white paper in the 17th century. But I love historians so much that I want to offer another version. According to the brief information of the paper production technology, the color of cotton fiber is white. This means that if we take pure cotton and make paper out of it, we will get white paper without any chemistry. In my opinion, this is a very reasonable version, and to check it out, let's see what historians of the 19th century wrote about it. I found the best research on this. It was conducted by Professor Likachev in 1891st year. Modern authors for some reason do not write such works themselves and constantly refer to Likachev's work. This is called paper work and the oldest paper mills. Here's what Professor Likachev writes. Since the well-known research on paper by Gerard Meyerman, the belief in the existence of two kinds of food paper made of cotton, the so-called bombicini, and rag paper made of rags, flax and hemp, has finally been established in science. Despite the fact that many scientists confessed to difficulties in distinguishing bombicin from ordinary paper, the conviction remained unshakable for a long time. It wasn't until 1884 that Bricky came out with an article arguing that cotton paper never existed, and that the term bombicin should be abandoned as untrue. Rag paper was first used in the East. The secret of its preparation penetrated to the West only after a long period of time, in 2 or 3 centuries. Arguing with Paulin, Bricky argues that if the use of cotton for paper production is still likely, in relation to Sicily and Spain, where cotton was cultivated, although it was considered very bad, then the preparation of bombicina in France is quite improbable. Here is another interesting passage. In 1889 year, the Neapolitan archivist Berain wrote an article about the paper, and wished to make a new research experience. Confused by the dispute of experts about bombicin, he decided to turn to a naturalist about the documents of the Neapolitan archive, which were considered undoubtedly bombicin. Having cut off a piece of blank paper in the documents of 1284, Berain sent it to the famous Professor Giovanni Fred for microscopic examination, and received a decisive answer. A microscopic examination of the piece of paper sent to me makes it clear that it did not include any test bomb geno. Google doesn't translate testuta bombayina, but it looks like we are talking about cotton fibers. The Italian comrades will probably correct me. In Wissner's solid work, the histological considerations expressed by Bricky are strongly criticized. But regarding the composition of the paper, the author comes to the same conclusion. Here is the translation: there has never been paper made of raw cotton. Thus, in modern times, the issues of cotton paper can be said to have been resolved negatively. So the professor, based on the research of other scientists of the 19th century, concludes that paper from pure cotton has never been produced. We may not believe Professor Likachev, but what is important is that historians believe this professor and refer to his works, which means that, in the modern historical version, pure cotton paper has never been produced. The paper was made of various rags, and therefore could not have a white color, and therefore, all documents issued before 1799 year and having a white color should arouse strong suspicions. And if someone shows a 17th century book with white pages, then this someone just wants to mislead us. So we have several ways to recognize a fake. First of all, documents issued earlier than 1838 year should not contain cellulose in their composition. Secondly, the documents were issued before 1799 year, that is, before the discovery of paper bleaching technology. They cannot have a white color. Also, in the work of Professor Likachev, I found another interesting method of identifying new-made documents. It turns out that, until the beginning of the 19th century, when all paper was made by scooping, almost all sheets had watermarks. Of course, they are not as small and elegant as on modern banknotes. In the manual production of paper that existed up to the 19th century, a wooden frame of the size of a paper sheet was used. Instead of the bottom of the mold, a network of thin metal wire was stretched along and across. The threads ran in a thick, close row. Very early, from the end of the 13th century, in different places of the form, more often in the middle of the left half of the sheet, the manufacturer's stamp began to be placed, arranging it from the same wire, bent in the form of an image. This is a paper or so-called watermark. The liquid paper mass, deepening and flowing in the gaps of the net, lay down on the wire with a thinner layer and imprinted on itself both the filigree and the entire binding. A paper sign made of the thinnest wire is clearly visible in the world. So now, Armed with the knowledge of Comrade Likhachov, everyone can easily distinguish a real book of the 17th century from a new model. On the pages of this edition of the 17th and 18th century, some kind of watermark will be visible to the light. Bell, eagle, lily. An incomplete list can be found at Likhachov. But, if the book does not have watermarks, it means that it was released in the 19th century. And in the end, I want to add a video about Old Believers caused a lot of identical comments about Professor Pizikov and the difference between Old Believers and Old Believers. Therefore, there will be a separate video explaining all these nuances. That's it. Watch my channel.